Join us for a thrilling ride down memory lane as we revisit the original Ghostbusters. Meet Peter Venkman, Ray Stantz, and Egon Spengler. These three brainiacs at Columbia University are obsessed with one thing: ghosts. Dr. Ray Stantz barges into their office and informs Venkman of the ghost sighting at the public library. After interviewing the traumatized librarian, Venkman, Ray, and Egon make their way into the basement, where they eventually encounter the spectral apparition of a woman, apparently a librarian. As a result of their encounter, Egon announces that according to his readings, it is hypothetically possibly to capture and contain a ghost. Unfortunately for the three, when they arrive back at their laboratory at Columbia, they discover that it is being emptied by Yeager, the university dean, who informs them that the university is terminating their research grant and kicking them off campus owing to their disreputable research methods and reputation. Venkman suggests that they use Egon's research to build a ghost containment unit and go into business hunting and capturing ghosts. Advertising themselves as the Ghostbusters, the three rent a dilapidated firehouse, purchase a decommissioned ambulance, and hire Janine to work as their secretary, but do not attract any business. Meanwhile, Dana Barrett, a concert cellist, returns home to her apartment at Central Park West after a rehearsal. She begins to put away groceries only to watch in astonishment as a carton of eggs begin cooking themselves on her kitchen counter. After hearing an inhuman growling from her refrigerator, upon opening the door she finds that the inside has been transformed into a portal into a bizarre alternate dimension populated by terrifying dog-like creatures, one of whom bellows Zool at her. Fleeing her apartment, she turns to the Ghostbusters for help, having happened to catch their commercial. Instantly attracted to her, Venkman agrees to return to her apartment under the pretext of investigating the matter, but by the time they arrive there is no sign of any paranormal activity. The Ghostbusters are on the edge of bankruptcy when they receive a call from the glamorous Sedgwick Hotel begging for their services. Guests and staff have reported seeing a gluttonous green specter made of slime floating around the corridors, and the concierge wants it removed before it threatens the hotel's business. Armed with nuclear-powered proton packs and ghost traps, the Ghostbusters hunt Slimer through the hotel corridors. During their hunt, Egon warns the others not to cross the streams of the proton packs, suggesting potentially devastating consequences. The Ghostbusters eventually manage to contain and trap the ghost, although not without causing much property damage. Nevertheless, the Ghostbusters' fame also coincides with a dramatic spike in ghost sightings and paranormal activity throughout New York City, and they are soon utterly overworked. In order to cope, the three Ghostbusters hire a fourth member, Winston Zeddemore. Still infatuated with Dana, Venkman does research on her paranormal encounter and discovers that Zool is the name of an ancient Sumerian demigod who in turn was the minion of a greater entity called Gozer. Increasingly charmed by Venkman, Dana agrees to meet him for a date, but on the night that they are to meet, she is attacked in her apartment by one of the dog-like demons she saw in her refrigerator. Arriving at Dana's apartment for their date, Venkman discovers that she has been possessed by Zool and is calling herself the Gatekeeper. Mistaking Venkman for an entity she calls the Keymaster, Dana makes several attempts to seduce Venkman, who rebuffs her each time and tranquilizes her after watching her growl and snarl like a demon and levitate 4 feet over her bed. Meanwhile, Dana's neighbor has been possessed by a creature calling itself Vince, the Keymaster, and wanders the streets of New York raving about the coming apocalypse until he is picked up by the police, who in turn take him to the Ghostbusters. The next morning, Walter Peck arrives with a court order that demands that the Ghostbusters shut off the power to the containment grid and cease business operations. Peck has the power shut down, at which point the containment grid explodes, freeing the trapped ghosts and triggering major paranormal chaos throughout the city. Peck blames the Ghostbusters and has them arrested, while Louis escapes in the confusion. In jail, the Ghostbusters consult architectural records of Dana's building and discover that the building's architect was Ivo Shandor, a mad doctor and cult leader who, following World War I, decided that society was too sick to survive. Consequently, he and his cult performed sacrifices on the roof to summon Gozer, the building having been designed to absorb paranormal energy and provide a doorway for Gozer to enter this universe. At Central Park West, Louis arrives and finally meets and shares a passionate embrace with Dana. The Ghostbusters manage to convince the mayor that the city and the world are facing an apocalyptic threat, and that by hiring the Ghostbusters to solve it, the mayor will practically guarantee his re-election. Convinced, the mayor dismisses Peck and arranges for a police and National Guard escort to take the Ghostbusters to the building, where they are cheered by a crowd that is gathered around the building in anticipation of the end of the world. The Ghostbusters enter the building and make their way to the ruins of Dana's apartment, where they discover a staircase leading up to a temple on the building's roof. There, they watch as Dana and Louie open a massive doorway and are transformed into demons, and a near-naked woman with red eyes crosses over from the alternate dimension. Egon identifies her as Gozer. After Ray's attempts to invoke bureaucracy to convince Gozer to return to her dimension of origin fail, Gozer attacks them. After the Ghostbusters use their proton packs on her, Gozer appears to dissipate, but a booming voice demands that the Ghostbusters choose the form of the Destructor. Realizing that Gozer will take on the appearance of whatever the Ghostbusters think of and use it to destroy the world, Venkman orders them not to think of anything, but unfortunately Ray, trying to think of something that could not possibly be harmful, has already made the choice. The Ghostbusters watch in astonishment as a giant version of the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man materializes in the city and strides towards the building. After blasting Gozer's new form with the proton packs does not work, in desperation Egon suggests that they cross the streams of the proton packs in order to create a huge surge of energy that will close the doorway to Gozer's realm. As they do so, the roof of the building is destroyed in a fiery explosion that incinerates Gozer and its minions, but the Ghostbusters manage to find shelter and survive. Although the outer forms of the minions are destroyed, both Dana and Louie have survived within the shells and are freed from possession, having no memory of what has occurred. Dana and Venkman kiss, and having saved the city and the world, the Ghostbusters return to the street to a hero's reception from the crowd. But as they drive off, no one notices that Slimer is once again roaming free. It's been decades since the original Ghostbusters saved New York City. Join us for a thrilling glimpse into Ghostbusters, Afterlife. Summerville, Oklahoma, the Ecto-1 bursts out of a mine belonging to Shandor Mining as Egon Spengler is being chased by an unseen spectral entity. He makes it back to his house and attempts to spring a huge ghost trap on it, but the trap fails when he cannot activate it. Egon runs back into the house and prepares himself, but the ghost gets Egon in his chair and kills him. Meet Callie Spengler, a struggling single mom, and her two teenagers, Trevor and Phoebe. Facing financial difficulties, they're forced to move to a rundown farmhouse inherited from Callie's estranged father, the one and only Egon Spengler, a founding member of the Ghostbusters. The family makes it to Egon's house, which everyone in town just knew as the home of the dirt farmer, since he was such a recluse. The house is a dump, but Callie hopes they can make it their new home. They are met by Janine, who informs Callie that Egon left them saddled with a lot of debt, with Janine having been the one to take care of bills. Callie later takes the kids to get dinner at a burger shop, where Trevor goes in to apply for a job. He is instantly smitten with an older girl named Lucky, who works there. When they return home, Phoebe notices her chessboard and pieces all scattered on the ground, so she resets them before going to bed. Meanwhile, Trevor walks around outside and goes to the barn where he discovers the Ecto-1. In the morning, Phoebe finds that one of the chess pieces moved, so she moves one of her own pieces. Phoebe starts summer school, where she meets her teacher, Mr. Gruberson, and her classmate Podcast, who has a supernatural podcast. Phoebe goes to Gruberson's office, where she learns that he is a seismologist and has been monitoring seismic activity coming from somewhere in town over the last few years. Phoebe and Podcast later walk toward the mines, where they find what looks like an old skeleton of a monster. Later at night, Phoebe sees that the chess pieces move again, and when she moves her own piece, the ghost in the room knocks her piece off the board. She looks around the house some more and finds Egon's PK's meter and an old ghost trap. Back at school, Phoebe brings the ghost trap and shows Podcast, but Gruberson, being a Ghostbuster fan, fascinated shows Phoebe and Podcast a video of the original Ghostbusters after they saved Manhattan from destruction in the 80s, and Phoebe learns that her grandfather was a Ghostbuster. Gruberson takes them outside the school to see how the trap works, but they accidentally unleash a monstrous ghost that flies toward the Shandor mine. Gruberson takes Phoebe and Podcast back home, where it appears there is some chemistry between Callie and Gruberson. The kids go through more of Egon's stuff, finding a book about Gozer the Gozerian, the same evil ancient entity that terrorized Manhattan all those years ago, as well as the knowledge of Gozer being freed by the gatekeeper and keymaster. Meanwhile, Lucky invites Trevor to go out with her friends to hang out at the mines, where they find one of the ghostly entities bursts out and flies away. Phoebe takes the PKE meter and goes to the barn, where she comes across Egon's old workspace and computer room. She finds his old uniform with his name on it and soon realizes that the ghost that's been following her is Egon. She fixes up one of his devices before returning to her room. When Phoebe later asks Callie what kind of scientist Egon was, she brushes him off with resentment for abandoning her and her mother. In the morning, Phoebe brings Egon's old proton pack to show Podcast as they test out the beam, which turns out to still be powerful. They then hear a noise coming from inside a building, and they find a blue blobby ghost that they name Muncher. They fire the proton beam at Muncher, causing him to fly away. They chase after the ghost just as Trevor rides in after having fixed up the Ecto-1 and taking it out for a spin. He picks up Phoebe and Podcast as they chase after Muncher, with Phoebe sitting in the car's retractable seat and continuing to fire the proton beam at Muncher. The three chase Muncher outside of town, going toward the mine, using a remote-controlled trap to catch the ghost. As they are driving back, they are caught and arrested by Sheriff Domingo. Phoebe uses her one phone call to contact Ray Stantz, who runs an occult antique shop out of the former Ghostbusters headquarters. When Phoebe mentions Egon, Ray says he can rot in hell until Phoebe mentions he is dead, at which point he feels remorse. Ray explains to Phoebe that Egon had a major falling out with him and the other Ghostbusters before he retreated to Summerville with every single bit of their old equipment. The last time Ray spoke to Egon, he mentioned some crazy talk about the apocalypse. Phoebe manages to tell Ray she is Egon's granddaughter before Domingo makes her hang up. Gruberson keeps walking until he finds Vince, the keymaster, in the aisle. He runs for his life, but the beast chases Gruberson all the way to his car and attacks him. The next day, Phoebe and Podcast bring Trevor and Lucky to the mine to do more investigating. They find a temple with a statue of Gozer, plus the preserved body of Ivo Shandor, a cult leader devoted to Gozer. There are years marked on the walls from various seismic events over the decades, and it looks as though Shandor was preparing to reawaken in the current year for Gozer's return. Another earthquake happens, but the kids discover the source, a ghostly portal underneath a trap Egon built to keep Gozer and other evil ghosts at bay. Callie finds the PKE meter and comes across Egon's lab and eventually realizes his ghost is there too. He has been keeping up with her growing up, with pictures and news articles of her all over his wall. Unfortunately, she is found and attacked by Zuul, the gatekeeper. The kids return home to find Callie possessed by Zuul. She becomes feral and attacks them, while Gruberson, now possessed by Vince Clortho, disables Egon's trap, leading to many evil ghosts to be set free into Summerville. The kids go to Egon's lab and get his equipment and uniforms to try and stop Gozer themselves. While this goes on, Zuul and Vince Clortho gather to summon Gozer. The new Ghostbusters drive toward the site of the chaos as Zuul and Vince bring forth the old temple and revive Gozer's human form. Shandor awakens and tries to appease the evil ghost, but Gozer tears Shandor in two pieces. The four arrive to fight back, with Podcast managing to weaken Zuul and break Callie free from her possession by trapping Zuul. Gozer is temporarily weakened, but the trap malfunctions and Zuul possesses Lucky, allowing Gozer to regain power. He tries to kill Callie and the other kids until someone calls out, the original Ghostbusters Ray, Peter Venkman, and Winston Zeddemore arriving to help out. Phoebe attempts to get Gozer on her own, at which point Egon's ghost materializes and helps her hold it right. He stands alongside his former friends and partners, and together with Trevor and Podcast, they manage to activate the trap to consume Gozer, Zuul, and Vince. Trevor helps break Lucky out of the shell that was once Zuul, along with Gruberson coming out of the Vince Clortho shell. The old Ghostbusters talk to the new ones, and Venkman acknowledges that Phoebe really is Egon's granddaughter. Egon's ghost looks at his friends as they reconcile for their earlier feud, and Callie is able to finally hug her father before he crosses over. The old Ghostbusters return to New York City in the Ecto-1. In the mid-credits scene, Venkman is seen married to Dana Barrett's Sigourney Weaver, who is doing his old electroshock test on him. post-credits scene, a flashback is shown, a deleted scene from the original movie of Egon giving Janine a coin. In the present day, she shows the coin to Winston, who is making arrangements to have the old headquarters and Ecto-1 restored. Meanwhile, one of the ghost containment units starts to glow red. Ghostbusters became a pop culture phenomenon, a hilarious adventure that combined scares and laughs. So the next time you want to remember a movie or show, remember, who you gonna call? Flicks and TV.